Hey friends, tonight we'll travel back in time to an age when the world was still wild and kingdoms were built not just on power, but on belief. So, take a deep breath, make yourself comfortable, and let the story begin. Long ago, before history was written, there lived a young man whose destiny burned brighter than the morning sun. His name was Untold, the man the world would one day call the Golden King. But Aryan wasn't born into a palace. He was born among ruins, the son of a scholar, the last breath of a dying kingdom. At 16, he watched his home fall to fire. At 17, he buried everyone he loved. And by 18, he stood alone on the ashes of his past and swore that no darkness would ever claim his world again. He began his journey not with armies, but with faith. Where others saw destruction, he saw possibility. He gathered farmers, builders, dreamers, ordinary souls who still dared to believe in tomorrow. And together, they rebuilt what had been lost. Stone by stone, a new city rose from the earth. When its first wall touched the sky, the people whispered, "A king walks among us." And soon, he became exactly that. Under Aryan's rule, the land healed. Fields once barren shimmered with gold. Rivers that had forgotten their way began to flow again. Laughter filled the markets, songs echoed from the temples, and for the first time in a century, the people slept without fear. He ruled not from a throne, but from the streets. He walked barefoot among his people, listened to their stories, and smiled like one of them. To the poor, he was mercy. To the broken, he was hope. To the land itself, he was light. By his side was Queen Mira, gentle, wise, and brave in her quietness. She never sought the throne, she sought the man behind it. When Aryan dreamed too high, she brought him back to earth. When he grew silent, she filled his silence with calm. At night, when the moonlight spilled through the palace corridors, they walked together, hand in hand. She would whisper softly, "Your greatness will not be in your wars, my love, but in your forgiveness." And Aryan, smiling faintly, would reply, "Then let the world remember peace in my name." In the 10th year of his reign, he built something unlike anything before, a temple not for gods, but for light itself. Its golden dome shone like a second sun, and every morning the city awoke, bathed in its reflection. Inside the temple stood a mirror, said to reveal not the face, but the soul of whoever gazed into it. Every dawn, Aryan stood before it, and the mirror showed him a heart pure with purpose and mercy. Stories of his kindness spread across lands. Merchants carried his name beyond the seas. Sailors sang of him under foreign skies. Even his enemies lowered their swords when they heard his voice. Untold, the king who turned famine into feast, sorrow into song, darkness into dawn. Children were named after him. Poets wrote verses for him. And the elders said, "The gods have sent light to live among us." But every light casts a shadow, and behind every great man, silence waits, soft, patient, dangerous. As Aryan's glory grew, so did his pride. The advisors who once challenged him began to agree with every word. The poets stopped writing truth and began writing praise. And little by little, Aryan began to believe that the light came not through him, but from him. It started as a whisper, too faint for anyone to notice. A thought that drifted quietly through his mind like smoke. Without me, he thought, there would be no order, no peace, no world. The whisper stayed with him, hidden behind his smile. And though the city still glittered, a faint chill began to move through its streets. Like the first breath of a storm that no one yet sees. The age of light had begun, but the night was already on its way. The nights in Aryan's kingdom had always been soft. The moonlight shimmered on the palace domes, and the air carried the scent of sandalwood and jasmine. But lately, the nights had grown quieter, too quiet. Inside the grand palace, Untold sat alone. The great halls that once echoed with music now hummed with silence. The courtiers had gone, the laughter faded, and the golden crown lay heavy upon his head. He touched the edge of it gently, running his fingers over its jewels. Each gem shimmered like a trapped star. It was beautiful, but it hurt. For in its beauty, Aryan began to hear a voice. a voice that wasn't real, and yet it was. "You are the chosen one," it whispered. "You were born to rule, not to serve. Without you, there is nothing." Aryan closed his eyes, tried to breathe, tried to silence the thought, but it grew louder. Each time he wore the crown, it spoke again. And soon, he began to listen. Days turned into weeks. The temple bells still rang each morning, but Aryan stopped visiting. The mirror that once reflected his soul gathered dust. He began holding meetings alone, dismissing his advisors one by one. When Queen Mira questioned him, he smiled. But there was something strange behind that smile now. One evening, she found him standing before the empty throne, his eyes distant. He didn't notice her at first. Then, slowly, he said, "Do you hear it, Mira?" She frowned gently. "Hear what?" He looked up, and his voice trembled. "The throne. It speaks. It needs me." She stepped closer, her voice calm and loving. "It's not the throne that speaks, my love. It's your fear." But Aryan turned away. Fear? No, this was destiny. This was power speaking to him, pure and divine. And from that night on, he began to trust that voice more than her words. The people still cheered his name. They still believed their king was the light of the land. But the light in his eyes had changed. It burned sharper, colder, like gold melting into fire. He ordered new statues built, not of gods, but of himself. He said it was to inspire unity. But when Mira saw the first one, she felt her heart grow heavy. The sculptor had carved not a smile, but a glare, proud and unblinking. "You are forgetting who you were," she told him one night as rain tapped against the palace windows. Aryan turned slowly toward her, his expression unreadable. "I have not forgotten," he said softly. "I have evolved." Mira's eyes filled with tears. "You once ruled with compassion, and now I rule with purpose," he replied. "Mercy is weakness. The world needs strength." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "The world needs your heart, Aryan." But the man she loved, the gentle king who once walked barefoot among his people, was slipping away, buried beneath gold and pride. Months passed. The city changed. The streets were still bright, but the laughter sounded forced. Every mural, every coin, every banner carried the king's face. And in the palace, the crown's whisper never stopped. It spoke to him when he woke. It echoed when he dreamed. It told him he was eternal, that his people existed only to serve his vision. And slowly, Aryan began to believe that he was more than a man. He was destiny itself. One night, unable to sleep, Aryan walked to the Temple of Light, the same temple he once built with love and faith. Dust covered the golden floor. The candles had all gone out. Only the moonlight spilled faintly through the dome. He approached the mirror, the sacred one that had once shown his pure soul. When he looked into it now, he gasped. For the reflection staring back wasn't the man he remembered. The eyes were colder, the smile thinner, the light gone. And yet, the reflection bowed its head and whispered, "You are the only truth left." Aryan's hands trembled. The sound was inside his mind, but it felt real. He reached out to touch the mirror, and for a moment, it felt as if the glass itself was breathing. Mira found him there hours later, still standing before his reflection, whispering softly to himself, "I was chosen. I was chosen." Outside, thunder rolled over the horizon. The rain began to fall, first gentle, then furious, washing the gold dust from the city walls. That night, lightning struck the temple spire, splitting it clean in two, and the people said it was an omen, that the gods who once blessed the king had turned their faces away. But Aryan only smiled, and whispered to the crown resting on his head, "They bow to me now." The age of light was fading, and in its place, the first shadows of madness began to bloom. The rain didn't stop for 7 days. It fell over the golden kingdom like a curse, gentle at first, then cruel. The streets flooded, the rivers swelled, and whispers began to move through the air like ghosts. People said the gods were angry. They said the storm was a warning. But in the palace, Aryan Dev sat high above it all, watching the world drown through the windows of his marble hall. He no longer heard the laughter of his people. He no longer cared for the cries in the marketplace. His days were filled with silence, and his nights with the voice of the crown. Mercy is weakness, it told him. Strength is all that keeps the world in order. And Aryan listened. One morning, a farmer was brought before him. The man had stolen a handful of grain to feed his starving child. Aryan remembered, once he might have forgiven him, offered food, work, and kindness. But now, as the guards dragged the man to his knees, Aryan only saw disobedience. He looked down from his throne, his eyes sharp and distant. "Why steal from the king's granary?" he asked softly. The farmer trembled. "My lord, the rains have ruined the crops. My son is sick." Aryan raised a hand, silencing him. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "The law must stand, even when hearts break." Then he nodded once, and the guards dragged the man away. Mira watched in horror. Later, she came to him, tears in her eyes. "You could have saved him," she said. Aryan didn't look up from his papers. "I did. I saved the order of my kingdom." She stared at him for a long moment. "You're saving order," she whispered, "but you're killing love." He looked at her then, and for the briefest second, something inside him flickered, like a candle fighting against the wind. But then it went out. The punishments grew harsher. The prisons overflowed. Fear began to replace faith. And yet, Aryan believed he was protecting his people. Each decree, each execution, he justified with the same quiet conviction. "If they fear me, they will not destroy what I built." At night, he walked alone through the palace corridors. The torches burned low, shadows danced on the walls. And sometimes he could swear the statues whispered behind him. They used to sing his name in joy. Now, they spoke it in silence. One evening, Queen Mira stood in the courtyard, watching the storm fade into twilight. When she turned, she saw Aryan watching her from the balcony above. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "Do you remember the day you promised your people peace?" Aryan's expression didn't change. "Peace cannot exist without power. But power without peace," she said, "is only fear dressed in gold." He walked down the steps slowly, the wind tugging at his robes. "Mira," he said, his voice low, almost tender, "you speak of love as if it can hold the world together. It cannot. Only strength can." She reached for his hand, but he didn't take it. And in that moment, she realized she had lost him. Not to another person, but to the crown itself. Weeks passed. The rain finally stopped, but the air in the kingdom grew colder. The people still bowed when Aryan passed, but their eyes no longer shone with devotion. They looked down, afraid to meet his gaze. And Aryan, he saw it. He saw their fear and mistook it for respect. He told himself he was loved. He told himself he was right. He told himself he was right. He told himself mercy was a fool's dream. But deep inside, something small and human still stirred. A faint ache that came to him in the quiet hours of the night. When even the crown fell silent, he would wake suddenly, heart pounding, unsure if he had dreamed it or remembered it. A time when he was simply Aryan, a boy who wanted to save, not rule. One night, unable to sleep, he walked again to the temple. The mirror still stood there, cracked from the lightning strike months before. He looked into it, and for the first time, he couldn't see his reflection clearly. The cracks divided his face. Half light, half shadow, and somewhere deep within the silence, a voice, not from the crown, not from the world, but from himself, whispered, "Where did your mercy go?" Aryan turned away, his breath trembling. "I don't need mercy," he said aloud. "I need control." But the mirror behind him shimmered, and in its broken surface, his reflection smiled, a cruel, twisted smile he did not make. He left the temple then, but that smile followed him. In every torchlight, every dream, every echo of his footsteps. By dawn, the people spoke no longer of their golden king. They spoke of the ruler of silence, a man who once brought light, now walking in the shadow of his own power. And so, mercy, the very heart that once built his empire, was gone. The king who had once lifted his people from darkness had become the darkness himself. The throne room was silent, yet the silence felt alive, pressing against Aryan's ears like a living thing. Candlelight flickered along the golden walls, reflecting off the polished floors and catching the edges of the grand throne. Each shadow seemed to move of its own accord, curling and twisting as if the room itself breathed. He stepped closer, the weight of the crown heavy in his hands, and for the first time, he felt that the whispers he had dismissed were not figments of imagination. They were real, and they were waiting. The voices came first as a murmur, soft and indistinct, like the far-off rolling of waves. Then they gathered into words, a chorus of invisible courtiers. They spoke of victories he had won, of battles he had led, of promises made and broken. Their tone was not accusing, it was insistent. Each syllable drilled into his mind, entwining itself with his thoughts until he could no longer tell where his voice ended and theirs began. "Your Majesty," 1,000 echoes whispered in perfect unison. "Do you remember what you promised?" Aryan froze. The crown felt warmer now, almost alive, as if it had absorbed every flicker of sound. The polished gold seemed to pulse, and in the flickering candlelight, he thought he saw faces forming in the walls, faces of advisors long dead, lips moving silently as they spoke. His pulse quickened. He dropped to one knee, holding the crown against his chest. The voices grew louder, pressing into him, tugging at the corners of his mind. They spoke of loyalty and betrayal, of power and responsibility. Every word carried weight, like stones pressed against his ribs. He tried to push them away, tried to remind himself that he was the king, that he controlled the throne, but the whispers laughed softly, echoing from the ceiling, from the floor, from the golden tapestries that lined the walls. "You are not alone," one voice said, slow, deliberate. "We are here. We have always been here. Always watching. Always remembering." Aryan's eyes darted around the room. The figures of the court seemed to flicker in and out of existence, shadows dancing along the walls, their shapes unfamiliar yet familiar, like memories that were almost forgotten. The whispers spoke of things he had never seen, victories and battles he had only heard in legends, and decisions made in corridors he had never entered. Yet somehow, it all felt true. He stumbled toward the throne, placing the crown carefully upon his head. The instant it settled, the voices fell silent, replaced by a single, steady hum that vibrated through his bones. The throne itself seemed to lean closer, as if welcoming him into its secret, ancient knowledge. He could feel the weight of history pressing into him, every king who had sat here before, every choice they had made, flowing through his veins. Then came the laughter. It was soft, delicate, almost playful, but it sent shivers down his spine. He looked around, searching for its source, but the room was empty. The sound echoed off the walls, whispering in his mind. "You think this is madness? You think this is power?" Aryan's breathing quickened. The crown pulsed again, warm against his temples. The voices returned, but now they spoke as one, chanting softly in a language older than the stone beneath his feet. Each word carried weight, weaving itself into the fabric of the room, twisting reality. He could feel his mind stretching, bending, as if the throne itself was rewriting his memories. He fell to the floor, hands clutching his head. Images flashed behind his closed eyes, scenes of battles, betrayals, moments of mercy that had turned into weakness. He saw soldiers falling, cities burning, friends turning into enemies. And through it all, a single truth rang clear. The crown demanded more than obedience. It demanded sacrifice. Aryan's thoughts spun wildly, memories overlapping, creating a tapestry of terror and awe. He remembered Myra's face, her gentle words, the loyalty in her eyes, and he wanted desperately to call to her, to anchor himself to something real. But the room swallowed his voice, and the whispers took it, twisting it into something unrecognizable. "You are ours," they said. "The throne chooses, not you. The crown remembers, not you. Obey, or be forgotten." He shook his head violently, as if to dislodge their presence, but it did no good. The golden walls bent, the ceiling stretched, and the flickering candlelight formed shapes that moved toward him, circling him, surrounding him. He could see his reflection in the polished floors, but it was not his own. The face staring back at him was older, wiser, but colder, hardened by centuries of watching, of ruling. And yet, it was undeniably him. The throne groaned under the weight of history, and the crown pulsed again, embedding itself deeper into his mind. Aryan felt as though the room itself was alive, breathing in his thoughts, shaping them, guiding them. He could no longer distinguish his own voice from the chorus of whispers, his own intentions from the crown's desires. "Do you see now?" a voice asked softly. "Power is not mercy. Power is memory. Power is what you endure." Aryan's knees hit the floor, and he pressed his palms against the stone. The voices swirled around him, chanting, laughing, whispering. He could feel centuries of kings, advisors, and warriors pressing into his mind, offering advice, judgment, and expectation. His eyes rolled back as he surrendered, and for the first time, he felt the truth. The throne did not care for his desires. It cared for history, for legacy, for obedience. The whispering became a flood, an unstoppable current that pulled him under. Each syllable carried a weight that pressed against his soul, until all he could hear was the collective memory of the throne, a heartbeat of gold and stone, relentless and eternal. He collapsed fully to the floor, the crown heavy on his head, and closed his eyes. The room dimmed, shadows coalescing into figures that knelt around him. Their faces were hidden, but their presence was undeniable. They reached toward him, not to harm, but to test, to shape, to claim. "You will not fail," they said. "You will endure. You will remember." Aryan's breath came in ragged bursts, his body trembling, but he felt a strange calm settle over him. The voices had not gone. They had become part of him, echoing in his blood, guiding his thoughts, shaping his mind. He was no longer just a man. He was a vessel, a witness, a keeper of the throne's memory. When he finally opened his eyes, the room seemed unchanged, yet every shadow carried a weight. Every flicker of candlelight held a secret. The whispers had settled into a low, constant hum, a reminder of the price of power, the burden of history, and the inevitability of the crown's demands. Aryan rose slowly, trembling, and placed both hands on the throne. The golden arms felt impossibly warm, almost alive, and the crown atop his head pulsed once more, confirming what he had feared and hoped. He was no longer alone. He was part of the throne, part of its memory, part of its eternal watch. And somewhere deep within the walls, beneath the echoes of candles and whispers, the voices whispered one final truth. The throne remembers all, the crown demands all, and the king shall endure. The courtyard was silent under the silver light of the moon, yet the air was thick with tension. Aryan stepped carefully over the cold cobblestones, the echo of his boots the only sound breaking the night's stillness. He could feel the weight of the crown pressing against his skull, a constant reminder of the throne's endless demands. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the ground itself resisted him. From the shadows, a figure emerged, Mira. Her face was pale, framed by the soft glow of the moonlight, and her eyes held a mixture of fear, sorrow, and determination. Aryan's heart ached at the sight of her. Even now, after all the whispers, all the madness, she remained a tether to the man he once was. "Mira," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to come," she replied, stepping closer, her hands trembling slightly. "I can't watch you destroy yourself, Aryan. You're losing yourself to this throne. Can't you see it?" Aryan's eyes darted around the courtyard, half expecting the shadows to reach for her, half fearing that the crown itself would punish him for letting someone see his weakness. He swallowed hard. I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. "The throne, it's not just a seat. It's a presence. It's in my mind, in my thoughts. It's everything." Mira knelt down beside him, her fingers brushing against his hand. "You are still you, Aryan. You don't have to let it consume you. Remember why you started, why you became king. Remember who you love, who trusts you. That is your power, not this crown." The wind stirred the courtyard, and for a moment, Aryan felt a flicker of clarity. The whispers from the throne were still there, low and insistent, but Mira's presence cut through them like a knife through mist. He could see beyond the gold and the shadows, beyond the murmuring echoes that had haunted him. But clarity was fleeting. Aryan shook his head, the weight of the crown forcing him to his knees again. I cannot escape it, he said, his voice barely audible. The throne, it remembers everything. Every mistake, every mercy I offered that was twisted into weakness. It will not let me go. Myra's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained firm. Then let it remember you for something greater. Not for the fear it inspires, but for the courage it hides. You have a choice, Aryan. You can let this crown define you, or you can define yourself, even within its shadow. He closed his eyes, feeling the cold stone beneath his palms, the soft brush of her hand against his. The whispers grew louder, testing him, urging him toward submission, toward the complete surrender the crown demanded. But for the first time, Aryan felt a defiance rising within him, small but fierce. I will not be a servant to it, he whispered, his voice steadier now. I will not let it erase who I am. Mira smiled faintly, hope flickering in her eyes. Then hold on to me, she said. Hold on to what is real. That is your anchor. That is your rebellion. For hours, they remained in the courtyard, the moon tracing patterns on the stones as shadows danced around them. Aryan felt the crown's presence, heavy and relentless, but he also felt something else, a spark of humanity, a pulse of emotion untouched by power. For a brief, shining moment, he remembered the man he had been before the throne claimed him, before the whispers became his constant companions. And then the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The whispers faded into a low hum, retreating into the walls and floors of the palace. The crown still pressed against his head, but now it felt different, less a burden, more a challenge. Aryan stood slowly, Mira at his side, and looked out over the kingdom. It was still a land of stone and shadow, of politics and power, but now he could see it with new eyes. The whispers would return, as they always did, but he would face them. He would endure them, and he would remember that even kings, no matter how golden their crowns, were still human at their core. Mira squeezed his hand, and he returned the gesture, a silent promise passing between them. No matter what the throne demanded, no matter how deep the madness ran, they would face it together. The first light of the day reflected off the golden spires of the palace, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Aryan smiled. Not the smile of a king enthralled by power, but the smile of a man who remembered what it meant to be alive. The crown would always demand, the throne would always remember, but Aryan had found his anchor. And that, perhaps, was stronger than any crown. The palace had never felt colder. Even as the sun climbed higher in the sky, its golden rays struggled to penetrate the dark corners of the throne room. Aryan's steps echoed against the stone floors, each one a measured defiance against the whispers that lingered like ghosts. He sat on the throne, not as a conqueror, but as a man holding onto fragile clarity. The crown felt heavier than ever, yet lighter too, because he was no longer alone in its shadow. Mira stood behind him, her gaze scanning the room, vigilant. Her presence had become his tether to reality, the only thing that reminded him that the world outside the palace still existed. The whispers returned, low and insistent, curling around his thoughts like smoke. You are ours, they murmured, 1,000 voices layered over one another, each trying to drown the spark of defiance he had found. Aryan pressed his fingers against the golden rim of the crown. He felt its pulse, subtle but constant, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. I will not be consumed, he whispered to himself. Not now, not ever. The walls of the throne room seemed to breathe. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, flickering like the pulse of an unseen heart. From the far corner, a door creaked open, revealing a hallway that had been sealed for centuries. A cold wind swept through, carrying with it a faint metallic scent, blood, iron, and dust. You feel it too, don't you? Myra's voice broke the silence. The crown, it's speaking. Aryan nodded, feeling the words more than hearing them. The whispers had become images now, visions of past kings, their faces twisted in madness, their hands reaching for the same golden rim that pressed into his head. They were warnings, or perhaps invitations. He couldn't tell. He stood, gripping the throne's arms, and approached the open door. The hallway was narrow, lined with old tapestries depicting battles, feasts, and ceremonies long forgotten. The faces in the tapestries seemed to move as he passed, their eyes following him, silently judging. At the end of the hall, a chamber awaited. It was small, circular, lit by a single shaft of sunlight filtering through a cracked window. In the center lay a stone pedestal, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly like embers in a dying fire. Aryan recognized them instantly, the same symbols that had haunted his dreams, the same marks whispered about in the kingdom's oldest texts. He reached out, his fingers trembling. The moment his skin touched the stone, the room shifted. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming faces, arms, and eyes that had never belonged to any living being. The whispers became voices, distinct and demanding. You were chosen. You carry our legacy. You are both the crown and its keeper. Aryan staggered back, breathing hard. Mira stepped forward, taking his hand. Remember who you are, she urged. You decide how this ends. He closed his eyes, letting the weight of the crown, the palace, and the whispers settle into his bones. For the first time, he understood. The crown was not merely a symbol of power, it was a test. And every king who had worn it had failed because they forgot themselves in its reflection. Opening his eyes, Aryan stepped forward again. He pressed both hands to the stone pedestal, letting its cold surface anchor him. I am not afraid, he said aloud. I am not yours to claim. I am still Aryan. I am still me. The shadows writhed, the chamber groaning under their collective weight. Then, silence. The whispers ceased, leaving only the faint hum of the crown against his skull. The symbols on the pedestal dimmed, their ember-like glow fading into stillness. Mira squeezed his hand, relief and caution mingling in her expression. It's over for now, she said. But you must be careful. The crown doesn't forgive easily, and it never forgets. Aryan removed the crown, setting it gently on the pedestal. It gleamed in the muted sunlight, a reminder of both temptation and responsibility. For the first time in decades, he felt a clarity untainted by the echoes of past kings, by the voices of the throne. Then we rebuild, he said, turning to Mira, not as rulers bound by fear, but as guardians of what this kingdom truly is. We cannot erase the past, but we can guide the future. The chamber was silent, but Aryan felt the presence of something unseen, an acknowledgement, perhaps, from the crown itself. It would wait, watch, and test again. But now he had learned its rules. Now, he would endure, not as a prisoner, but as its master. Outside, the kingdom stirred. Birds called across the stone walls, and the first villagers began to emerge from the shadows of early morning. Life continued, fragile but unbroken. And inside the palace, the golden crown rested on its pedestal, its whispers quiet, waiting patiently for the next challenge. Aryan took Mira's hand, walking back through the hallways, no longer haunted by shadows, but guided by them. The crown's eternal watch would never end, but neither would his vigilance. Together, they had faced the whispers, faced the darkness, and had survived. And perhaps, for the first time, the palace itself could breathe again. The palace felt alive again, but not entirely in a comforting way. Shadows clung to corners as if reluctant to let go, whispering faintly, testing boundaries. Aryan could sense them, faint pulses of memory embedded in the walls, relics of kings who had worn the crown before him. They were quiet now, but he knew better than to trust silence. Days passed, yet Aryan could not shake the feeling of being watched. Not by servants, not by Mira, but by something unseen, waiting for the moment he faltered. And then came the signs. Small at first, a misplaced scroll, a tapestry slightly askew, whispers in the corridors he walked alone. The palace was speaking again, but this time in riddles. One evening, as dusk settled over the golden towers, Aryan found a folded parchment on the steps leading to the throne room. Its edges were charred, as if it had survived fire, yet the ink remained fresh. He unfolded it carefully. The message was brief. Not all shadows bend to the crown. Some linger for vengeance. Myra's eyes narrowed as she read over his shoulder. Someone's inside the palace. Someone who knows the crown and what it can do. Aryan's jaw tightened. The crown had taught him patience, endurance, and vigilance. But betrayal was a lesson he was about to learn anew. "We need to find them before they act," he said. "And we need to understand who they truly are." That night, they began the search. Torches flickered along the halls, illuminating the faded murals of past battles and coronations. Each room seemed larger than memory suggested, each shadow more deliberate. Whispers slithered along the walls, sometimes familiar, sometimes alien, echoing names that had not been spoken in centuries. In the northern wing, behind a set of sealed doors, they discovered the first sign of intrusion: footprints in the dust leading to the inner chamber. But the prints were odd, too light, almost floating above the floor, as if the intruder had walked between the moments of time itself. "This isn't ordinary," Mira whispered. They moved without touching the ground. Aryan nodded, feeling the pulse of the crown against his skull. "Time bends here," he said. "Not just for the crown, for anyone who knows its weight." The inner chamber smelled of iron and wax. Candles had been lit recently, their flames trembling despite the lack of wind. And on the pedestal, beside the crown, lay another note. "The 13th is worthy, but so are others who watch. Choose wisely." Aryan's pulse quickened. The crown had always been a test of the wearer, but now it was a test of his judgment, his ability to discern friend from foe in a palace that remembered too much. Suddenly, movement in the shadows. A figure stepped forward, draped in a cloak that shimmered faintly under the candlelight. The intruder's face was obscured, but Aryan could feel their intent, sharp and deliberate. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, voice smooth and cold. "The crown chooses its keeper, but it also demands a challenger." Aryan stepped forward, hand resting lightly on the throne's armrest, feeling the echoes of kings past resonating through him. "If you seek the crown, you must face me," he said, steady despite the weight of centuries pressing around them. The figure laughed softly, a sound that seemed to bend the shadows. "I do not seek to fight. I seek to remind. Not all power comes from wearing the crown. Some comes from understanding its history and its consequences." Myra's grip on Aryan's arm tightened. "Who are you?" she demanded. The intruder tilted their head. "A guardian of what you barely understand. The crown is more than gold. It is memory, vengeance, and hope. And I am here to test whether the 13th can survive the echoes of all three." Aryan felt the crown pulse stronger than ever, thrumming through his mind like a drumbeat of inevitability. The whispers returned, weaving through his thoughts. "Trust yourself. Trust no one. Trust only the throne." The intruder stepped closer. Shadows seemed to cling to them, twisting like smoke around a flame. "Tonight, you will see what the throne remembers," they said, "and what it will never forgive." With that, the candles flickered violently. The room stretched, walls elongating as if time itself were bending around them. Figures of past kings appeared, spectral and unyielding, circling both Aryan and the intruder. The air shimmered, heavy with centuries of power and regret. Aryan steadied himself, eyes fixed on the intruder. "I will not be broken," he said. "I am the 13th. I will endure what the throne demands." The intruder smiled faintly. "Endurance is only the beginning. Tonight, you will learn the true cost of memory." And as the spectral kings advanced, the crown pulsed, radiating warmth and pain at once. Aryan felt centuries of judgment and expectation weigh upon him. The palace had awakened, alive with purpose, and he, its newest keeper, was about to face the first trial of his reign, the challenge of understanding, surviving, and mastering the whispers of all who had come before. Outside, the golden towers of the palace glimmered in the moonlight, silent witnesses to the confrontation inside. And within the walls, history was not finished. It was rewriting itself. The chamber seemed to stretch infinitely, yet the spectral kings remained ever present, circling like guardians of a secret no living soul should know. Their whispers, barely audible at first, grew into a chorus, layering centuries of judgment and expectation over Aryan's every thought. The intruder stepped aside, revealing the true depth of the trial. Before Aryan lay a long table, carved from obsidian that shimmered like water in the dim light. On its surface rested 12 objects, each a crown, each belonging to a king long forgotten, and each imbued with a fragment of their soul. This, the intruder said, is the trial of shadows. To claim your place as the 13th, you must understand each king, each choice, and each consequence. Only then will the throne accept you fully. Aryan's pulse quickened. And if I fail? He asked, though deep down he already knew the answer. The intruder's smile was faint, but chilling. The throne forgives no ignorance. Fail, and your name will vanish from memory, as if you had never existed. He stepped forward, eyes scanning the crowns. Each one hummed with a subtle energy, vibrating against his palms, even from a distance. Aryan could feel their histories, the victories, the betrayals, the regrets, all locked into these relics. The spectral kings leaned closer, their ghostly eyes scrutinizing him, testing his resolve. He picked up the first crown. As his fingers brushed the cold metal, a vision surged through him. He was in a battlefield, arrows raining down, shields shattering. A king stood before him, trembling yet defiant, ordering his men with a courage that defied death itself. Aryan felt the fear, the hope, the responsibility pressing against him, not as an observer, but as if he himself were that king. When the vision faded, he gasped for breath. I understand your courage, he whispered. The next crown brought him into a council chamber. A king argued with his advisors, each word a battle of intellect, each decision shaping lives he could not yet see. Aryan felt the weight of diplomacy, of trust betrayed, of loyalty questioned. He understood why mercy had sometimes seemed weakness, why deception was sometimes necessary. One by one, the visions continued. A king sacrificing his own family for the kingdom, another hiding in the shadows while plotting a silent coup, a queen ruling in secret, her power invisible but absolute. Every crown was a memory, every object a lesson, every spirit a ghost that would not rest until their story was understood. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time bent unnaturally around the chamber. Sweat dripped from Aryan's brow, his hands trembling with exhaustion, yet he could not stop. The whispers grew louder, merging with the echoes of the visions. Finally, only one crown remained, the one belonging to the last king of the Golden Line, a ruler shrouded in mystery and rumored madness. Aryan hesitated. His fingers hovered above the crown. He could feel the pulse, not just of the metal, but of the king himself, an echo of obsession, brilliance, and cruelty. He took a deep breath and placed it on his head. Immediately, the vision struck like lightning. He was in the throne room, a younger version of the king pacing, talking to shadows, hearing voices no one else could hear. The madness was palpable. Aryan felt it consuming him, threatening to crush his mind, to blur the lines between his own thoughts and those of a king long dead. But he remembered the lessons from the other crowns, the courage, the sacrifice, the cunning, the subtle wisdom hidden in silence. He focused, grounding himself. The next crown brought him into a council chamber. A king argued with his advisors, each word a battle of intellect, each decision shaping lives he could not yet see. Aryan felt the weight of diplomacy, of trust betrayed, of loyalty questioned. He understood why mercy had sometimes seemed weakness, why deception was sometimes necessary. One by one, the visions continued. A king sacrificing his own family for the kingdom, another hiding in the shadows while plotting a silent coup, a queen ruling in secret, her power invisible but absolute. Every crown was a memory, every object a lesson, every spirit a ghost that would not rest until their story was understood. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time bent unnaturally around the chamber. Sweat dripped from Aryan's brow, his hands trembling with exhaustion, yet he could not stop. The whispers grew louder, merging with the echoes of the visions. Finally, only one crown remained, the one belonging to the last king of the Golden Line, a ruler shrouded in mystery and rumored madness. Aryan hesitated. His fingers hovered above the crown. He could feel the pulse, not just of the metal, but of the king himself, an echo of obsession, brilliance, and cruelty. He took a deep breath and placed it on his head. Immediately, the vision struck like lightning. He was in the throne room, a younger version of the king pacing, talking to shadows, hearing voices no one else could hear. The madness was palpable. Aryan felt it consuming him, threatening to crush his mind, to blur the lines between his own thoughts and those of a king long dead. But he remembered the lessons from the other crowns, the courage, the sacrifice, the cunning, the subtle wisdom hidden in silence. He focused, grounding himself, let its newest keeping the experiences flow through him instead of overwhelming him. He understood not just the king's brilliance, but his fragility, his mistakes, his relentless desire for control. The chamber fell silent.